Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Cho, anchor for Squawk Box Europe. Thank you very much for joining our panel today. We've got a terrific conversation lined up for you. We're going to be talking about pitching to corporates and some of the challenges and opportunities and how you get started along the way if you are a founder of a tech company. So let me introduce our panel to you. We have Sandeep Raithatha, who is Head of Product Innovation and RARA Engagement at Telefonica UK. Sandeep's team leads on 5G product innovation for O2 business and are responsible for identifying, trialing and launching new 5G products to market. The RARA engagement team works closely with RARA and O2 to identify innovative startups that can deliver revenue opportunities and capabilities for O2. Also joining us on the panel today, Rachel Peck, who is global lead of startups business development for Microsoft. Rachel is responsible for building commercial strategies for seed Series C startups as part of Microsoft for Startups program and developing corporate access for Microsoft's customers to enrich their innovation strategies. Accustomed to the complexity of multi-million-dollar deals, Rachel led the UK and Australia Azure independent software vendor partnerships, developing new cloud SaaS solutions between MS and partners. Also with us today, Jen Abel, who's co-founder and CEO of JJELLYFISH. Jen is a thought leader in how startups can successfully pitch to corporates, giving keynotes as a featured speaker for Condé Nast Glamour, General Assembly, Techstars, and Boulder Startup Week. She advises early-stage B2B startups on winning over corporate partners while still in the early stages of business. And also, you can't see him on the screen at the moment, but we are bringing out to you Richard Britton, who is a partner at MediaCom. Rich has worked across the UK and North America over the last 15 years, covering pretty much all industries from autos to luxury. He's led some of the world's largest brands such as Apple and Coca-Cola. Most recently, Rich has taken on the role of head of digital consultancy at MediaCom, which sees him working closely with startups and scales. So thank you to all of our panelists and speakers for joining the conversation. Sandeep, I'll start with you if you don't mind. First up, if you could just explain to those online today what sort of work you're doing with startups at the moment and what sort of opportunities you see for founders out there.
Sure. So yeah, thank you, Karen. So that was a great introduction. What we're really doing with startups is working with WIRA, our UK open innovation team, to really find innovative new startups that can help build on our capabilities we have as Telefonica. So being the #1 mobile network provider in the UK, we really want to innovate and work with our customers, providing new value-added services, both to businesses and consumers. So when we're working with startups, what we're trying to do is bring the best of both worlds together. So the agility and the innovation from startups, combining with the brand and the channel and the reach that we can provide, and bringing those two together, what I often call as co-innovation, bringing them together to then provide something really unique and differential to our customers, both if it's businesses or consumers.
Rachel, let's hear from you, because I'm sure you come across hundreds of different startups over the course of a year. Just give us a sense of the sort of approach that you have to working with startups there at Microsoft and what role you think they play in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, so Microsoft for Startups, we really see ourselves as an enablement opportunity to not only from the technology enablement and helping startups build the best in class solutions for their customers in the market on the platform and technology from Microsoft, but we're actually there as well to think about how we can help startups think about their commercial growth and really accessing customers perhaps that we can provide them access to. So when they're building that industry or deep technology solution, we help them think about how that can enable our customers' innovation as well. And how do we actually bring those two together? And as part of Microsoft for Startups, we also work really closely with our enterprise account teams to really think about how our customers can access such a global ecosystem of emerging technology through startups as well. So quite similar to how Sandeep described it, but really bringing two different worlds together to help them see how they can better partner together.
And Jen, let's just flip over the conversation to the other side. You advise a lot of startups about how to get going when they're speaking with corporates. Where do you think they're at when they come to you? What's the stage that they're at in the understanding of how corporates work?
Yeah, so we specifically support with U.S. corporate entry. Most companies have some level of traction in their local market, right? But U.S. corporate entry is always sometimes a little bit of a different beast. You're dealing sometimes with headquarters and being able to just reduce the friction, right? That is the number one goal as a founder when you partner with corporations. How do you reduce the friction for these folks to take a risk on you, to want to work with you, but more importantly, align with their buying process and not be running to try to execute against your sales process?
Now, I'm not sure if we've got Richard. I saw him pop up a moment ago, but I don't think we have him just yet. So I'll just continue on the conversation a bit and we'll bring him in when he's good. Clearly, events have changed on the ground a little bit this year. COVID-19, the business climate is dramatically different to what it was at the start of the year. It felt as though everybody was on this digitalization strategy. But now with the deep economic downturn, a lot of companies are trying to first stay alive, and 2, reach for more credit, and then 3, work about accelerating towards some of those digital trends. Sandeep, what does that mean when we talk about this business climate? How does it affect some of the startups?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really challenging, and of course, it's nothing any of us all predicted. But I think that there's definitely opportunity. While it's challenging in terms of for the startups understanding, where they'll get their future investment from, how they'll continue to operate as a business. I think there's definitely an opportunity, and where we've seen examples where we've worked with some of our startups and where they've been able to really pivot. So, using their agility that maybe we couldn't have done. We've seen startups like Qdini or Rotokeek that are really providing queuing and social distancing type solutions for our customers. And it's really a great opportunity, I think, for the startups where, they've really taken on and understood the challenges of the pandemic, but really looked at ways they could make an opportunity for them as a business as well. And I think that's really the key thing. It's really thinking about how, as a business, could you change or pivot to serve your customers, and then leverage your partners like O2 and Microsoft to really support them during these challenging times.
Richard, I think we've got you good now. So I'll just pitch a question to you. We started out talking about working with corporates, this bridge between, what startups need to do to get going and how corporates approach working with some of these junior companies. Just weigh in on that.
Yeah, I think it's really just understanding what the challenge is properly. Kind of really what is the challenge, the problem in MediaCom and Blink Consulting, which I work for as part of MediaCom. It's very much around trying to solve problems with getting in front of consumers and how to engage with them more. So really, it's just understanding what the issue is, and then how the product or service can actually adapt or pivot, as Sandeep was saying, to help with that and be additive maybe to what else is going on. You don't need to be the singular source, the silver bullet to save everything. You can just be really additive to what else is going on for that particular client and add value that way. And having that kind of holistic thought and being able to be additive, as I say, I think when I'm speaking to big brands, Coke and PSA and lots of others, they like that approach. If you're a junior company, like I say, you don't just need to go, right, we've got all the answers. You can talk about the ecosystem as well.
Rachel, do you want to come in on how COVID has changed the situation? It feels as though some companies very much want what some startups are working on, and then perhaps just less interested in other areas now. It feels as though it's very single focus. If you've got the right product, then corporates want to engage with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to both Rich and Sandeep's point, I think the pivot with what startups have done in quite an agile way, actually taking the customers on the journey as well. I think one thing we're seeing from engaging with all the customers that we are, where we're introducing them to startups, is the pandemic itself has allowed them to actually find greater purpose in why they want to engage in that particular segment of the market. Perhaps rather than having a broad perspective on looking at quite a variety of maybe emerging technologies or startups in the ecosystem, they're actually delivering to quite a collective purpose within the business. And we're actually finding like your traditional innovation teams much more connected now into the business units where they must have that impact. And I feel that's a massive opportunity for our startups, because we're able to then connect them to those better people, more connected from a communication perspective. So I think it's allowed a corporate to really think about what they're trying to achieve, be more prescriptive with it, but actually giving an opportunity to a startup to pivot to that, but bring a customer along on that journey at the same time.
Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I fully align with Rachel's thoughts. I mean, COVID has opened up a window of opportunity startups and corporations have never felt in decades, right? We have been forced to go and accelerate digital transformations in 5 months that would typically take 5 to 7 years. And corporations are feeling net new problems they've never been able to solve before, or they have unmet needs that are currently rising with the way that work is changing and distributed teams, the way you sell to your customers, the way you engage with your customers. And I think this is an incredible time to be a founder and to be able to navigate a lot of this ambiguity and really find a place that might not even be commoditized yet because of how much has changed so rapidly and so quickly.
Rich, what would you say about how startups need to think about the pressures that big corporations are under at this point? I mean, clearly revenues have fallen off a cliff and they're finding new opportunities where they can. And sometimes startups have a role to play in helping keep their business alive at this point.
Yeah, I think it's about being present and often just really, talking about the product, but also what are the insights that they're finding, from a consumer point of view, from a product point of view, being there to support big brands and really being, I keep saying the word, I'm going to overuse it, but additive to the whole process and feeling like they're helping and they're supporting even with the position, the fledgling position that they're actually in. And I think it's waiting for that opportunity to then come through when, potentially budgets do start to come back to do something a bit bigger. But I think the reality that I'm seeing is that there are still large clients that have budgets for innovation, because I think Jen and Rachel Point and Sandeep, I think, touched on it as well. There's still people who want to invest in new technologies. They are the margins that make a difference, the competitive difference in whether it's a product or communicating a service or whatever to a consumer. So they're still there. But I think being present and not just taking no for an answer and really sweating all the connections they might have in an organization or agency.
Staying present, though, seems a bit challenging in this type of environment. And clearly, it's all virtual meetings, it's emails, it's phone calls. You may not just have that meeting on the sidelines that you might have had in the past. What do you say to that? What do you say to startups about, being in the mix? How do they make sure that happens these days?
So for me, that's as much around what you're saying, because getting a cold email or a LinkedIn email, all very well and good, and I get a bunch, as I'm sure we all do, but if it is genuinely tailored, if somebody's done the research and you can tell that they know about the client and they know it's your client, or they know a problem, or they know the industry, the challenge, and they're addressing that, and they can see where their USP is and that they're the only guys that can potentially solve it, then you listen and you pick up the phone's still there, like it's still available to have that quick call or jump on a Zoom. So in answer to your question, it's about being, relevant and telling that story. It doesn't have to be a big glossy pitch deck. I was just catching the end of the last session. It can be, I understand what your issue is here. I'll explain what I think it is, and I think I'll explain how we can help. I think it can be really as simple as that. That's just communication, good communication.
Sandeep, I want to come to you on this, because clearly there's been a lot of tech events over the years where you come across new names, new faces, new voices with different business ideas. Some of that's fallen by the wayside now, and I feel as though a lot of people are relying on existing networks, making the same calls to the same group of people they know, not necessarily reaching out and finding new people. That's a problem if we want to bring more diversity, more people into the network. What would you say about that challenge, and how great do you think it is at this point?
Yeah, I think definitely a challenge, especially as we're finding we're working from home in the UK even longer than maybe we planned as well. And maybe a number of things. I think initially, of course, we're joining events like these, which are great. I think trying to leverage your own personal network to get into other companies and organizations, getting those warmer referrals really helps. So finding brokers, agents, and anybody that can really help you have those sort of warmer conversations will really help. And then trying to make the right personal connections I think is key, either even through VCs or investors, anybody that can give you that warm referral versus, as Rich mentioned, everyone's getting too many cold LinkedIn connections, and if you're in a physical conference, you probably have that face-to-face interaction, have that coffee and start the conversation, which you can't have now. So I think you need to really rely on your existing network to then build out and start really having a targeted plan to do that.
What would you say about the volume of pitches that you're receiving now versus before the pandemic? Have they gone up?
Yeah, I think definitely, especially looking at LinkedIn, a number of pitches coming through, and then also via our outreach emails and scouts as well, where we're getting a number of new pitches coming through. And I think it's really key that they are very personalized and very relevant, becoming more relevant or becoming relevant in the pandemic is key. And in some cases, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was actually you actually had some more time as you're traveling less. I was probably listening to more pitches or reaching out and responding to more. But as time has gone on, it's becoming more challenging. So I think you've got to find more creative ways to get in touch.
Rachel, from your experience, I can see you nodding there. It sounds like it might be a similar case.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've had quite a lot of a large influx of applications for the particular program as well. But I think to pick up on maybe something Sandeep said around building your network, it may be also a practical time for many startups to think about how they're actually going to market, changing the language, or even thinking about, do they expand their network by thinking about how they partner with another business to access their customers as well. It's something that we like to help educate our startups on. It's not adequate for everyone, so it really does depend on what you've got. But imagine accessing a reseller or someone, again, who's quite a prominent player within the industry that you work in, and thinking about building a partnership with them and the added value between you and them in order to access the customer is also another way to help think about how you can maintain your access to a network as a startup as you're growing your business.
Can you say anything encouraging about access to the network? I mean, even as a female working in business, we've spent many years trying to ensure the network is as strong as male networks, and clearly a lot of businesses are trying to ensure that there's equal access. Is there anything actively behind the scenes that means that you are seeing more diverse pitches come through? You're actively seeking out different founders to work with?
Yes, absolutely. I think for me personally, I've been inundated with quite a diverse set of pitches from either geographies around the world that perhaps we've not engaged with before, or founders of various different backgrounds. We as a business, as Microsoft for startups and Microsoft as a whole, diversity inclusion is a heart of a culture for us. And we actually try and instill that in the startups that we're developing as well. So whether that's building, we're launching a female founders factory out in the US. That's one of the first we're doing specifically to enable women building new startups, all the way through to actually making sure we're partnering with an ecosystem that shares the same culture and values that we do as well, to ensure the startups that join our program have the same access to the rest of the ecosystem that can support them as well. So it really truly is a cultural part, as a pillar of our program.
Jen, I'm curious to hear from you too. What are you hearing from startups and founders at this point? Are they finding it more challenging trying to access corporates in the same way that they might have done before, the cold pitch along the sidelines of a tech event when someone comes off stage?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our fundamental belief: stop selling a solution and start selling a conversation, right? When you have an opportunity to go direct to an executive, and it's very easy these days, we all mentioned cold emailing, cold LinkedIn, short and sweet, problem focused, why them, why now? And everyone is seeking solutions to solve new problems that are arising every day. I would say since COVID happened, I've seen an increase in top of the funnel conversion. I think bottom of the funnel conversion is a little bit slower because people are being a little bit more thoughtful with how they're spending budget. Maybe they're looking at more alternatives than they have before because they have the time. I know that was mentioned about, less travel and not having to go into the office. But I would say, post-COVID, right now in the world we're in, people are constantly seeking for ways to increase revenue, decrease costs, decrease risk, attract a new customer base. It's a really actually exciting time. And I think if people have that mindset of now's the time to go to market and educate the market, I think people will see wildly different outcomes 6 to 9 months from now when those sales cycles come to fruition.
Can I ask you about some of the challenges and problems that startups have at the beginning? I mean, clearly it's a sort of a process or a stage where you make mistakes, you learn from the mistakes, and you grow and you improve. But I know a lot of big corporates have had problems with chasing growth at all costs. So their mindset has changed a little bit, particularly around corporate governance and integrity around revenue streams. So what do the startups need to think about in crossing some of those hurdles as they come in front of corporates? What are those changes that they need to make so they are ready to be in front of big companies?
Yeah. Be ready to learn and understand the corporate's current state. I mean, you can't sell someone a solution if you don't know the world they are in. So many startups, so many salespeople always fail at going solution first, trying to sell them something. Learn what their current state is, understand where their world is so you can walk them to your world, right? You can't just sell someone on a new world and expect them to take a big leap. And then secondarily, I think it's find those early adopters, find the people that have the opportunity to take a risk on you, right? Who have the social capital and who potentially have the budget and who have worked with startups before, right? If you go to a corporation that's never worked with a startup, you might be sitting there wasting your time because they're not going to be willing to take a risk on you. So, folks like Microsoft or Telefonica, I mean, these people work with startups, right? And they have the process there and they have the environment to support it and really set anyone up for success whom they partner with.
Oh, Rich, I think you're battling the technology, but I think we've got you back again. So let me seize the what would you say to some of the founders out there who may want to land one of the big clients that you've worked with in the past? What do you say about how they need to prepare to make sure they are ready for that big moment if the opportunity comes their way?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was saying before, I think it's researching the company, researching the individual that they want to speak to, taking that time to get the pitch right and tight. To then take that really to the agency, because 9 times out of 10, if it's a large company, they'll have an agency, and really lean into them to help support them on that journey. To then, what's the language, what's the problem, all those things that I was saying before, to then help paint the picture to then go as a combination to Blink, as we were saying earlier with MediaCom, going as a joint unit to a large corporate and explaining why they're really important and how they fit into the connected system and what part they will play and how that's different and what's the competitor advantage. You can start to build a really nice story with potentially quite a fledgling business. But I do think there's a big responsibility on agencies to do their job in providing that as a service as well, rather than going, okay, that's an interesting piece of technology, give me something, chucking it over the wall to a client, and if the client goes, don't get it, going, oh, they don't like it, there's work here to do. And I think if you're working with a good agency, and there's lots out there, and good people understand, VCs, private equity, as well as startups through to big corporations. If you've got somebody in the middle that gets that, then they can really help, can really support that moving forward.
Sandeep, you're nodding there. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely really important. And in the same agency perspective, what we think about it is, getting those relationships with either like an innovation team or a partnership team if it's within a bigger organization, and then really finding someone to become your champion and become your salesperson. So as your startup, you've got really an internal person selling your product internally. And that actually, for me, from my years of experience, both at Telefonica and at BT, reduces the barrier and the friction, and then they can get you the senior sponsors and the decision makers to help them and get your product into the big organization. So I think definitely that's really important.
Rachel?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything's been said so far. I think for me, we talk to startups about seeing your customer not just as a customer, but as a partner. I think when you see it's a transaction that you want to make, but rather than it always just being thought of as a sale cash transaction and winning a customer, thinking about how you're transacting knowledge between both parties. I love Jen's point putting yourself in that learning capacity, and having that mindfulness and empathy throughout the whole conversation, but keeping the lines of communication open at all times. So you know where you stand, understand what the corporate's doing, what their timeframes are, but still holding your position as a startup, because you're trying to run your own business at the same time. So holding your ground and where you stand on your position as well. I think having that thoughtfulness around what you're transacting together can help be successful.
Sandeep, what would you say about founder integrity at this point? Because there's been some very big cases. I mean, Uber was what we started around the regulation that went on behind the scenes of corporate governance, and then we moved on to WeWork, where there have been issues as well. What would you say to some of the founders about presenting themselves well and ensuring that they have the strong corporate governance in the background?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like the groundwork of foundation, and I definitely understand for startups, it's often a challenge because they might be focused on getting the MVP, starting to generate revenue, and then worrying about, some of the other, the foundations is often a bit of a challenge. But for us, it's really important, and we really encourage when we start engaging with our startups and scale-ups to really start getting the foundations ready for that procurement conversation you're going to have, where you really need to be clear on your data handling policies, how you manage security, but then also your financial background, how would you manage liability and risk? Because these big corporates you're going to work with, they do have some, they're going to be a little bit adverse to risk, and you've got to try and manage and work with them to comfort them, really, to make sure, they're willing to take a bet on you as well. So definitely do the groundwork and really get everything about your company in a digestible way that you can hand over to that procurement lead or that security officer or the data and compliance team.
Jen, can you weigh on this? It's not a conversation we would have had, say, a couple of years back, but increasingly that, we've seen there is risk if you team up with a founder and they don't have all of the background lined up. It's just growth for growth's sake, and it's not about making sure that there's decent practices in place, and that could be workplace practices, financial integrity. What can you say about this, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, working with startups, there's always risk, but there's also reward. And I think when you're working with a corporation, again, finding that early adopter as an early stage startup where you don't have that trust necessarily built yet, right? You don't have that many customers under your belt. Finding those early adopters whom the founder, not a salesperson, the founder can build the trust with. When the founder is front and center with a corporation, there's a different level of conversation that happens, right? They're able to sell a vision like no one else can. They're also able to prioritize and make the customer feel like they are a priority. Everyone tries to delegate sales, especially early stage sales, to someone other than the founder. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes companies make, especially when you're working with a Fortune 500 public company. They don't have an opportunity to take massive risk. So you as the organization need to take on more risk than you probably are willing to. But again, an early adopter is going to make sure you are successful. They're going to have a process to work with a startup. And I think more importantly, they are seeking a competitive edge and a reward. So they're going to be open to trying some things out as well.
Rachel, what does a founder need to do to win your trust?
Great question. I think there's a lot that goes where kind of the personal connection, seeing the genuine side of it. I think pitching to Microsoft, thinking about how we can help you. I think it's you want to have a conversation with someone where you can truly understand them, rather than just pitch us because you see us as someone that's just going to provide you maybe free stuff just to help people out on the way. Actually, we're a lot more than that. We have some really great things. So I think for us, working with a founder that really truly understands how they're going to achieve success by working with us helps take us on a journey and teaches us something at the same time. I think that's really important, like building that kind of connection between the two people when you're having that conversation.
Just before we move on a little bit, I want to talk about what sectors, what startups are hot at the moment, what everybody is looking at, what they're talking about. Sandeep, do you want to come in on that?
In general, as a theme, or I
mean, clearly with sustainability that's kicked off into another gear. We've also been talking a lot more about the acceleration of these digital trends. What does it mean in terms of startup world and what's hot at this stage?
Yeah, for us, I think the digital transformation is the theme, and then within that, the number of different pillars there is really key. So, from things like, technologies like 5G, where we're seeing lots of innovation, to cybersecurity, right? You've got to make sure everyone's secure when you're working at home and working remotely as well, to things like intelligent mobility and transport. So, that's becoming a key theme as well. Understanding how people are moving, how can we become sustainable in the future as well. But they're just to name a few. And for us, I think it's always key to keep a wide breadth of a view of all the startups, from the ranges from topics like AI to the Internet of Things, but, have some really specific key focus trends so that you're not just always looking everywhere every day, right? So how do you structure your scouting and your search as well?
Rich, what can you say about this?
So could you just repeat the start of that?
Yeah, just want to know what you think are the hot areas right now for startups. We're just saying there's been so many big themes out there, and having gone to a lot of tech events in recent years, it felt like it was VR, it was AR, it was AI, but now we've got clearly a pandemic, and it's about accelerating those digital trends and sustainability. Everybody seems to be talking about sustainability. So how does this translate to what startups are doing?
Yeah, I think Sandeep covered all of the major kind of macro trends, but he's nicked them all, a bugger. So yeah, I think that's. I mean, obviously 5G is the accelerant that's driving, especially around AR and a lot of AI actually that I'm seeing coming through companies. So that's an area it's going to only increase. I think a lot of the conversations around sustainable businesses and startups, both in technology and service as well, and leaning into CSR is becoming quite a thing. Really interesting. It's something I'm really passionate about, and you're starting to see some really interesting technologies where they may have started into something completely different, but they've seen that they can be utilized in for good. So that's a hot space at the moment, I think, where you go beyond technology and it's about human connection and people having their own experiences over the last 12 months. You see great minds being applied to things that are making a difference, which is brilliant to see. And from a corporate point of view, and not wanting to be too opportunist, I guess, about it, there is a CSR element that you can lean into there. And I've seen that, and I've worked on a few pitches and a few things that are going through right now where that's been a big part of the criteria as to why they've been chosen. And it's not the only reason, because there's other things that they're great at. And, the investment in the people as well as the product and, all of that kind of Dragon's Den-y kind of stuff. But it's real and present. So, yeah, I think sustainability and that kind of area is really hot at the moment.
It's a good point. I've seen it in all the press releases that have gone out from corporates about some of the initiatives, and so too with sustainability. Jen, come in on this point about some of the big areas that you think are really ticking in 2020.
Yeah, more than ever, I've noticed there's a lot of B2B companies. B2B companies used to be top down, right? Selling directly into executive buyers. Now B2B companies are doing bottoms up, selling into prosumers or users. I'm really, really excited to see how this pans out, and can there actually be weight behind doing a bottoms-up approach where people are using different tools on different teams, and it's less of this large buy for an organization, and it's more of, hey, as an individual, what tool do you feel more comfortable using? What's going to make you more effective? I think I don't know, I think the jury's still out. I think it's still early days, but just seeing that shift in just business models and distribution is really exciting.
And Rachel?
Yeah, I think, Rich touched on it as well. I think the concept of sustainability, but I actually feel like that's enabling subsectors of sustainability to also have quite a large surge. And so we've spent quite a lot of time recently doing a lot within the agricultural tech market as well, thinking about not just food sustainability, but actually if you think about the value chain of agriculture and technology within that, the supply chain, what that means, the sustainability around that as well. So I think some of these overarching larger terms and buzzwords are actually helping drive subsectors as well. And we're seeing that within health and life sciences, whether that's sustainability or whether that's actually how technology like from the pandemic, and we've seen the pivot of it is actually allowing things to drive quicker to a more purpose-driven agenda at the same time. So we're seeing the big buzzwords still, but actually how they're subliminally driving those subsectors underneath them, I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the trends coming through too.
Let's push on to the procurement process, if we can talk about that first up. But, what advice would you give to get through that procurement process, Sandeep?
Yeah, well, first step is, as I found, every company has a slightly different procurement process. And of course, none of them are going to be fun, but you really got to understand what it is end to end that you need to do. And definitely, as my point earlier, is understanding and finding a champion. So someone within that big corporate that can really help you go through the process, because I don't think any startup from the outside will be able to do it by themselves without having a real strong advocate and some real strong sponsorship as well. And then having like an executive sponsor that can help break down some of those barriers as well. And then, making sure you understand, like for Telefonica, what we do is where we have companies where we've made investments, where Wira has made investments, they get some preferential treatment. So if you can understand what things you might be able to do by getting investment, that can give you an idea of, how can you fast track procurement as well.
Rich, can you talk to this? Any challenges you've seen along the way? Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the devil's in the detail, right? Like, it's not the sexiest part of the process, and it's an effort sometimes. I'm sure for anybody that's a founder, certainly with the businesses I've got, leaning into the areas and pushing yourself to understand more and educate yourself more on bits, as Sandeep said, but then don't be afraid to seek help from elsewhere. People that know, people that have been through the process, that can support, whether that's through a mentor or just getting a trusted advisor or reaching out to other people in the network. Because I think there is a community there, and getting that process in your own head is really, really important. Because I think everybody said it, when you're turning up and you're working with, whether it's a big agency, a big corporate, or whoever it is, EC, being able to talk confidently about the things that really matter, whether it is security or whether it is, the procurement process, it really does matter, that it is about the product, but then being able to back up with, I've got my stuff in order as well in the back end. So you can trust me, you can rely on me, I've got it. So, and it's a huge part of it. We probably haven't touched on it a great amount, but that element of trust and taking a risk and building that pretty quickly is huge. So that devil in the detail is a big one.
Yeah, I can see the challenge, Jen. I mean, I've worked at my own company for 12 years, but still find it a challenge working out how to get things done sometimes. So it must be incredibly difficult if you're on the outside and you're trying to progress. So what is your key idea? What have you found along the way, and what advice do you give to people? Jen.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that question was directed towards me. The advice I have, for these founders is learn about the procurement process before you go through the procurement process, right? You have your executive buyer, you have your champion. Ask the questions. People are so scared about talking about pricing, about talking about procurement. Why? These people see value in working with you, right? And you're going to be giving them an unlimited, or not unlimited, you're going to be giving them a set of value that they're seeking. So just be confident in yourself, have the conversation about pricing, have the conversation about procurement before you go through it. Because I have to tell you, I've had conversations with founders that I've been a part of where we've talked about, well, what does the procurement process look like? And they're like, oh man, most people, like, they really kind of, and then I'm like, well, founder, you have such limited time. Do we really want to spend our time working with these folks who their procurement process is so outdated? It's not set up. It's not going to be setting you up for success. Do we even want to spend our time here? Right. So ask the questions up front, collect some evidence on whether you should be spending your time here as a founder and as a small company, and see around the corner. Why wait for that shock?
I'm surprised that questions are not asked around pricing from the outset. Doesn't the entire business model depend on pricing?
Karen, I can't agree with you more. I think founders are, it's their baby, right? And you get uncomfortable talking about certain things. So yes, pricing is always a last. They put it like, one of the number one things is do they even have budget to support you? So if you can't answer that, what's the point of getting on a second call? Like, you know, it's a funny thing, and I think people need to stop being afraid of it, and if you are, why?
Rachel, to you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think one thing I'll probably add to what Jen has said is like the more you can learn about it further up front as well, is the more that you can then have the confidence to always think about how you can negotiate terms that work for you as well. Because as much as perhaps this is the corporate procurement model that unfortunately you're having to participate in, it doesn't remove the ability for you to keep your position on your terms and what you were looking to deliver as well. I've seen perhaps some scary stories where founders have just given in continuously to the corporate because to them it's so valuable to win, have their logo on their website. It's actually exactly to Jen's point, is there value in there for you to go through this? So the more you can learn up front, the more you can hold your negotiation terms and your positioning as well as a business.
I just finally want to ask about diversity in the procurement process, because I had a conversation last year at a women's network, and one of the issues was that female startups, founders of startups, were just pitching to male boards, and there was clearly a problem that they couldn't connect at the same level, couldn't communicate, and so they needed to put more women in the procurement process in many corporations so the conversation could be had. They found that was one of the significant changes they could make. Rich, do you think there needs to be more diversity in the procurement process, and if so, how does that happen?
Yeah, I mean the short answer is yes. Kind of unpicking it and how that looks is a big question that probably we don't have in the few minutes we've got to answer. But I think it's understanding where those challenges are, and I think it's also highlighting the huge benefits of diversity from all backgrounds into great ideas. You know, that's where I see the benefit, and actually highlighting this is the real value that's added through diversity, and it's bloody good businesses and really good stuff for your clients or whatever, and highlighting that and really challenging the status quo for what it is at the moment and pushing through it. I think that's just imperative, but really highlighting where the positives are, and then going, we need to do more of this. This is why. Here's some great examples that show it.
I'm going to get a quick response from everyone. We're out of time. Sandeep, to you.
Yeah, no, I think definitely it's really important, and definitely look at the organizations, like as if you're a startup, and see what their policy is. Like, so for O2, we've been driving diversity and gender and ethnicity with, balanced shortlist for recruitment, published pay gap data as well. And then really you should then see, is there any objectives or plans to really drive that diversity? So as you said, when they'll be presenting to a panel or procurement team, will they have that right diversity that will give them, the traction they might need as well? So I think definitely have a look at the organization you're going to work with and see, are they planning, are they diverse, or have they got plans to be in place to do that?
Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with what Sandeep just said. I think it's again comes back to the learning piece, and understanding your customer, making decisions around your own principles as a startup as well, around who you choose to work with. Do they have the diversity that you're requiring? Will your position be heard? And I think there's always a practical way of also kind of highlighting that at the same time. Perhaps also looking at other ways of how companies are looking at doing procurement. I think there are other ways and means that you can still reach a diverse audience, but actually maybe not even using the traditional procurement processes. And so I think there are many tech companies out there enabling startups to sell via marketplaces and pieces these days that can actually enable that to be a lot easier and therefore offer more diversity as well.
And a final point to you, Jen, about whether there needs to be more diversity in the procurement process, and if so, how it can be achieved.
I would say know who you're talking to, right? You as a startup and as a founder, you can control who you send an email to. Do your research up front. Stop going out blind, right? Understand who you're talking to and learn from them. You can learn all of this in the first conversation. Maybe second conversation, sometimes it takes a little longer to build trust. But you're in control, right? And understanding who you're partnering with, that's on you as a founder and as a startup.
I love the word research as a journalist. Well, that brings our conversation to a close. Thank you so much to our panelists today, to Jen, Rachel, Sandeep, and Rich. Very much appreciate your time. And thank you to our online audience for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye.